Welcome to the Not Just New Movies podcast, the show where we review a seemingly random film currently not in theaters. My name is Ben Pearson, and today we're going to be talking about Wolfgang Petersen's 1984 film, The Neverending Story. Joining me is my regular co-host, Tyler. How's it going, man?
Yeah, I'm just trying to face my problems head on, just like Bastian's dad let us know. Great advice, by the way. Great advice.
Yeah. Excellent advice. So if you guys are just joining us for the first time, welcome. This is episode, I think, 103? Is that right, Tyler?
102, according to my notes.
Yeah.
103. Yeah, you're right.
Oh, all right, 103. There we go. So we recorded the first 100 episodes of the show from like 2010 to 2012 or some stretch around there.
Yes.
You can find all of those back episodes at njnmpodcast.blogspot.com. We have since moved from a weekly show to a monthly show. Mm-hmm. So in the newly revamped era, we're still sort of perfecting and tweaking the format. And we are still recording these episodes sort of months before you'll actually listen to them. So we're sort of banking a bunch of them now. So
one or both of us may be dead at this point.
Right, yeah, who knows?
A horrific podcasting accident.
If that is the case, much love to all of our friends and family. This is our last message, a review of...
Oh, God, who's going to upload it?
So hopefully, nothing catastrophic happens. I think that's pretty much going to take us out of this section and into our review of The Neverending Story.
Enter a world where a young boy's imagination becomes a vivid reality. The world of Atreyu and Artax, the Rockbiter, and a good and kind gnome. A world that is vast and eternal, treacherous and dazzling, unforgettable and free. For anyone who's ever made a wish, believed in a fantasy, or had a dream, this is The Neverending Story.
All right, so The Neverending Story came out 1984. This is a West German epic fantasy film based on the novel of the same name.
Definitely feels like it.
By Michael Ende. And it was directed by Wolfgang Petersen, also co-written by Wolfgang Petersen. Mm-hmm. He was the guy who directed Das Boot. He directed In the Line of Fire, Outbreak, Air Force One, The Perfect Storm, Troy, and the Poseidon Adventure remake called Poseidon from 2006 with Kurt Russell. So he's I would say, well-known. He's making like populist movies. Sort of right down the middle, nothing too crazy. But
I looked at his filmography, thinking that there might have been other movies like The Neverending Story in his batch, but I think this is like the only movie that it's very unique, I suppose.
Yeah.
I haven't seen any of his German films, so I don't have a full catalog of knowledge, but this is a very bizarre film, and I thought maybe he'd made him kind of very similar, his films, but I think this one's pretty unique.
Yeah, this is his first English language movie, and so
that might be why.
Yeah, just for the audience's sake, Tyler, why don't we just give like brief overview of our thoughts on the movie, and then we'll sort of dive into the nitty-gritty. But for me, real quick, because mine is going to be pretty short, I liked this movie more than I remembered. I'm pretty sure I haven't seen it since I was 10 years old or something. Okay. Almost to the point where I remembered specific things from the movie, but I did not. It was almost like I was watching it for the first time. And I certainly didn't, quote unquote, get what the movie was trying to say when I was 10 and watching this. Mm-hmm. So I think it was more of a fascinating experience for me to watch it as an adult looking back on it and being like, oh, this is sort of an interesting like cultural relic instead of I don't harbor a bunch of nostalgia for this movie because I didn't really grow up watching it over and over again. It's not like, some people have that with like the Goonies and stuff like that, and they would sort of rank this right up there with that as like a movie that they grew up on and watched it over and over. And I certainly did not have that experience with it. So
never saw the Goonies. Tired of hearing about it.
Yeah, it's really bad. It's a really, really awful movie, and anyone who likes it should be ashamed of themselves.
You hated Deadpool, Ben. You don't know what you're talking about.
I'm being a little harsh, but...
Remember that from 9 months ago?
Yeah, oof, man. That was... I'm still getting angry tweets about that one. So, no, I'm not really. Nobody cares about what I have to say. So, Tyler, what about you? What's your experience with this?
I'll give you a rundown. Watched it as a kid a lot. Was very excited when Part 2 came out. Rediscovered it in high school, read the book, and it was okay. It was great. I didn't pick up on any of the undertones either. I don't know if it has a lot of undertones. I guess people could try to find some, but I think it's just, here's fantasy, check it out. Like, it's a fleeting moment, and Bastian's kind of a wimp, so don't be like him, but also read books because it's exciting. It was basically a precursor to the Macaulay Culkin real to cartoon movie of Christopher Lloyd, The Page Master, very similar to that. Yes. I was reading the trivia about it after I watched it, and apparently the author of the book did not care for the film at all. Oh yeah, tried to change the whole movie or the name of the movie, and they said can't do it. Lost in court. So I don't really. I read the book twice in high school, and I think it was. I mean, for me, it was pretty accurate. The first movie it's just the first half of the book. I thought it was fairly on point, but I guess there were minor differences that I didn't pick up on that I guess the author really cared about. And I think some of the literal themes as opposed to cinematic themes were different, but overall it's pretty harmless. It's got some pretty cool special effects, some also very cheesy special effects, and it's very 80s cheese, very hippie as well, almost like Wolfgang Petersen had been a hippie in the United States for many years before making this film, because it was just full of that like kindergarten teacher, like follow your dreams, use your imagination, like everything's cool with a flying dragon. Just very positive, I think, this movie.
Yep.
Very scary, right, but also very positive.
So let's just run through the movie. Let's run through from start to finish.
The movie.
Just
let's dragon through this.
Let's call our own Falcors and cruise through.
I love children.
So Falcor is creepy as shit, by the way.
One of my notes is okay.
We'll get to him. So movie opens with this insane theme song, which apparently was like fantastic, mega popular back in the day, and I think hit like number 6 on the Billboard charts in the US, number 4 in the UK, which is like out of this world how that happened, because this movie, it opens with just this super weird
immediate.
Yeah, and
it's like Warner Brothers.
Yeah, and so underneath the music is this really cool sort of colorized cloud effect that they've got, which is they use throughout the movie to represent the nothing.
Don't worry, you won't miss it from the beginning, because it is in the film a lot.
Yeah, for sure. And it's actually a pretty cool effect, especially for 1984. It reminded me a lot of Darren Aronofsky's The Fountain, which we reviewed on an older episode of this show. And I think for that movie, he did a lot of like microbial kind of stuff, like super micro photography of chemicals reacting in water and things like that. And this sort of had that same, it felt like the 1984 version of that to me.
It was really cool looking.
Yeah, just that visual effect. So it's all colorful and nice. This theme song is going, and then just like an abrupt cut. One of the movie's, I guess the movie's first indication that, hey, this is a kind of thing that we're going to do a lot, which is blast music at full volume and then just cut everything with, as abruptly as possible. So,
and also do the opposite, where quiet moment, instant music.
Yes.
Something else going on.
I guess Wolfgang Petersen has never heard the word fade in his life, so it's just
nine.
So Bastian wakes up from this dream. He's this kid, as you mentioned, sort of
Bastian Balthazar Bucks is his full name, in case you were wondering. Bucks is supposed to be alluding to the word books.
Oh, okay.
B-U-X.
Okay. It could also maybe be alluding to bucks, like the ones that his father wants him to make.
Yes.
Grows up to be, a hard young man who...
An accountant, CPA, lawyer.
Yeah. The father, who, as you and I were sort of joking about right before we started recording, is not Dabney Coleman from Cloak and Dagger, even though I would have sworn and bet huge hoard sums of money that it actually was him.
I would have bet the Oren on that shit.
Do you know who it is, Tyler?
It's the guy from House of Cards and also the guy from Deadwood.
Yes, Gerald McRaney, I think is his name.
Dabney Coleman could have used some work.
He, in his own kitchen, is in like a full suit. Like his tie is not loosened. He is just
he's getting ready for work, son.
Yeah, he's getting ready.
He's the best character in the movie. He's got everything going for him.
He's in it for like 45 seconds. He tells Bastian basically, hey, kid, get your head out of the clouds. Get your shit together. I know your mom died. I know my wife has died fairly recently. But just, don't be a bitch, basically.
Right. This guy's training to be a professional boxer. He's putting eggs in a blender to drink raw. The dad has his shit together, and Bastian's like, I'm fucking eating bacon like a bitch.
That's his power breakfast for his business meeting that he's going to.
He recently took up steroid use. So he's like, son, you gotta get out there, face your problems, go out for the swimming team.
He's on the Stallone diet. So Bastian goes to school.
Can I stop you for a second, Ben?
Yes, go ahead.
If you thought that the father-son relationship was a major theme in this movie, it's not. It may have been in the book. I think maybe that's why the Michael end was such against this movie, because you would think the father-son relationship would develop over the film. It does not. But in part 2, chapter 2, the second chapter, whatever it's called, Neverending Story Part 2, that's a little more fleshed out. So for the fans of father-son relationships, it's in part 2.
Okay. So that's where you got to track that down.
So he goes off to school.
Goes to school, gets bullied by these 3 kids who look like they couldn't actually beat him up if they wanted to. These are like the worst cinematic bullies that I've seen. They're just like just normal looking kids.
Goonies rejects, as I put in my notes.
What rejects?
Goonies rejects.
Yes, exactly.
Future Trump supporters.
They throw him in a dumpster because Wolfgang Petersen had to be literal with this, I guess, for some reason.
His life is trashy. He's in a literal dumpster.
Yes. So forgive the impression, because I'm sure that's coming up multiple times throughout the rest of this podcast.
Ben.
So he meets this bookshop owner because he ducks in after he escapes the trash heap. He outruns these kids and goes into this bookshop, and this is where the movie sort of gets a little weird.
Starts to pick up.
Bookshop owner seems like almost a mystical sort of guy. Like, first of all, he's sitting there with his back to the door of his own shop, reading a book.
Instantly shotgunned from behind by a robber.
Yes, not aware of his surroundings at all.
Right.
Who's
there? Am I in a store?
He's very dismissive of like video games and just kids in general. And I was like, man, if he was like that in 1984, imagine how grumpy this dude would be in 2016.
God, he's grumpy.
Because even back then he was just like, there's no beeps and buzzes around here. You gotta read a damn thing called a book. He explains to Bastian that this book that he's reading is sort of a special book. It's not safe, right? Like the books that Bastian has read, which his bookography or whatever, the books that Bastian actually has read, seem to impress this. Yes, seem to impress this guy enough to allow him to sort of come into his inner circle, and he explains the truth behind this book in the most vague way possible, where he's just like, this is a dangerous book, essentially.
Now, to harken to the prince. Oh, go ahead.
Go ahead.
To harken to the Princess Bride, which was made 3 years later. Like, Peter Falk's description of the Princess Bride was so much better. Where he's like, there's wrestling, there's fencing, there's murder, there's torture.
Yeah.
Like, this guy was like, it's dangerous. Books aren't supposed to be dangerous. It's like, okay, we could probably describe it a little more better.
Yeah, and there are a couple sort of Princess Bride-esque moments in this movie, but we'll get to those too. So Bastian steals the book, and then the owner is not surprised by this. In fact, he nods and smiles to no one in particular when he realizes that Bastian has taken the book.
Right.
I don't really understand how this book really works. Tyler, do you understand the mechanics of it? Because this guy, for me, he almost seems like a mystical figure, like he doesn't really exist, but apparently he does, and then
he's an opium addict.
It seemed to me also like, does the book change every time a new reader holds it? Because the book later on in the movie is revealed to be about Bastian himself. Like Bastian becomes a main character in the book. Yeah. So did this guy, Mr. Coriander, was he the Bastian before Bastian?
Yeah.
Did he interact with these people in the same way, and the book just somehow knows to change the text every time a new reader grabs it? Okay, so there's some sort of magic
book. Now in the book in real life, the book, it's Fantasia, like they said in the movie, is built on the imagination of man, or the imagination of humankind. And in that book, Bastian like loses his memory, and he finds himself in like the underworld of Fantasia, and it is built on like pages and pages and pages of like images and what apparently is the dreams of human beings. So when a human being has a dream of something fantastical, it becomes a piece of paper that then supports the foundation of Fantasia.
Wow. So, so it's literal then, almost.
Yeah, almost. And then I guess Coriander was, as a child, he rebuilt Fantasia, but now because he's old and decrepit and constantly just taking opiates and heroin into his body, because that guy is sweating like a pig in the bookstore. Yes. He's dying. His image of Fantasia is dying. So Bastian has to grand theft that book and recreate that world in his own image. He becomes a tyrant eventually, basically.
Yeah. So Bastian ditches his math test for.
Oh yeah,
which is like the most the craziest attic I've ever seen especially for like an elementary school. What is supposed to be an elementary school?
Right.
They've got severed heads of wolves on mop sticks that are just like hanging out in there. They've got freaking full skeletons. Like, why is that not in a classroom being taught? This is just their sort of storage area. Right. But this attic is a badass location. It's got multiple windows, this really sweet looking vibe, and that's one of the big things about this movie is the production design is insanely good. Even in the quote unquote real world, with just like the Bastian story, not even getting into the realm of Fantasia, where it's really sort of kicks it up a whole nother notch. So he starts reading the book, and instantly we're thrown into this crazy world. So there's a rock creature. There are these labyrinth-esque characters that are, like Henson-style Muppet kind of things going on.
Don't get too used to them. They're going away real quick.
Yeah, I was expecting them to be major players in the story.
Oh, no.
They are not. They are introduced
absolutely not.
Basically just as a way to bring us into the world and sort of establish the stakes of what's going on in this universe, which is the nothing is encroaching. This force that is just destroying everything from all angles of Fantasia, coming in from the north, the south, west, whatever. And then I
gotta give acting props to Nighthawk. That guy was he took a few extra classes during the week.
Which one was he?
Nighthawk was like the guy that rode the bat at the very beginning. Yeah. Yes. Like he brought it. He brought his game.
The other dude with the top hat and the racing snail, I'm pretty sure became one of the
serial killer
Oompa Loompas in Charlie and the Chocolate Factory.
Very well be.
The Tim Burton version. Because I noticed that guy, there was some crazy voiceover for that guy. Like, they dubbed him because if you watch like closely and watch his mouth, the voice coming out is way different than the voice that should be coming out of that body.
Those were the parts filmed in Germany. Bastian's parts were filmed, I believe, in Canada, as I read the trivia correctly. So they may have also recorded the dialogue in German.
Yeah,
it's an original German film, like brought over for English-speaking audiences. So there is a German version out there somewhere that I kind of want to watch, but that's why the dub is such an important issue.
So right away, we're introduced to this awesome, like a strange-looking world. There's a really cool mix of live-action models, miniatures, sort of forced perspective stuff, like Lord of the Rings, how Gandalf is way bigger than Frodo. There's that kind of vibe going on, like all throughout this movie in different configurations.
Then there's just a random kid in a butterfly costume. It's like, come on, let's spruce that up a little bit.
So they go to the ivory tower because that's where the Empress is located. She's the only one who can save them from the nothing, right?
Yep.
She's she's at the heart of Fantasia.
Yeah.
So these characters that we were just mentioning, this big rock monster, the top hat guy, the bat rider.
His name's Rockbiter.
Rockbiter, yes.
Yeah.
So
he bites rocks.
They ostensibly are just there to take us, as the audience to the ivory tower. Correct. Instead of the story just dropping us right into the ivory tower. Even though the guy who comes out on the Empress's behalf basically explains everything that we need to know anyway. I guess they just didn't want to give him a bigger monologue than what he had to deal with anyway. So he very well could have explained everything. But, introduced these side characters. We go there. We discover that the Empress is sick, that the nothing is linked to her in some way, and things are getting bad. The only hope that they have is this warrior kid known as Atreyu, and they bring him in. They're like, he's out in the fields hunting buffalo in the purple realm or whatever they say, and then they're like, buffalo. He's our only hope, and then all of a sudden he's just there. Like, how long were they just standing around waiting for him to show up? But
9 months later,
so he shows up and he is. He's
Should we order takeout or anything? We're just going to be standing around at this tower for months.
Yeah, he is. Atreyu seems to be. He's like one of those kids that. He's one of those kids in movies that if you were a kid watching this movie, you would want to be him.
Right. Absolutely.
He's like the Benny the Jet Rodriguez of the Sandlot, kind of, like the movie's version of the coolest character.
Sure.
Bastian immediately relates to him, and
Bastian
also
is Atreyu, perhaps.
Yeah, also establishes sort of this weird psychic connection with him, where he, once Atreyu sort of accepts the quest of, going to save the Empress and stuff. Bastian continues to read, and then he starts to eat his own food, and then decides to hold off on that because he doesn't want Atreyu to get hungry or Atreyu to run out of food later on too. So there's this weird sort of thing where it was like almost like E.T., how we were talking about a couple months ago, where there's that weird sort of psychic connection between Elliot and E.T. in that way. So this is sort of almost a more literal version of that. So
it does get pretty cool in the sequel because they actually team up.
Okay.
So it's like Batman Brave and the Bold.
Is Bastian played by the same kid in the sequel?
No.
Oh, bummer.
He's actually played by the kid in Chuck Norris's Sidekicks, if anybody's seen it.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, that guy. He might be
so,
dead.
So, Tyler, one of the big... the kid might be dead? Is that what you're saying?
I think so.
Oh, man.
I said rest in peace, so it's okay.
One of the big moments from The Neverending Story, one of the big sort of pop culture things that has escaped this movie and entered the zeitgeist as a whole is the death of Artax, the horse.
Yeah.
I remember this being a way bigger deal than it actually is in the movie. I remember it being like... in my mind, this is one of the centerpieces of the movie. In actuality, it happens 30 minutes in, and you have barely seen Artax at all. I was
also,
shocked.
He comes back. It doesn't matter.
Yeah, I was shocked that this happened so early on in the movie. I was like, wow, they have not established the relationship between Atreyu and Artax in any way. There's no reason that we should care about this character dying other than the fact that he is a horse who is drowning horrifically in the swamp. Which, to be fair, it does make you feel really bad for that freaking horse.
Right. The horse didn't really die. I think the internet thought that he did, but he didn't.
Oh, really? Wow.
Yeah, he didn't really die.
Didn't realize it was like an urban legend, but...
Yeah. That the movie producers would just watch a full-grown horse drown in mud.
Gotta go method on this one, guys.
Yeah. It would be a... Oh, whoa, bad German accent.
Wow, you've actually had the restraint to stop yourself there. It's pretty rare. So Atreyu, gutted at the loss of his horse and best friend, he is.
I got a few zingers.
Do it.
CSI Miami zingers.
Hit me. Yeah, just feed them in, weave them into this tapestry of this episode as we go.
Atreyu must have gotten pretty hoarse when he was yelling at Artax. Without Artax, Atreyu's future looks pretty muddy.
I immediately regret telling you to go ahead with these.
Seems like Artax got pretty swamped. That's it.
Okay, thank God. All right, so Atreyu continues on his journey.
And by the way, Morla, the German E.T., the big turtle that he visits.
Yes, that's what I was getting to. So he arrives at this mountain in the swamp, realizes it's a giant ass turtle, and then continue. What were you saying about Morla?
The German E.T., the version of E.T. that lives in Germany.
Oh, that's it, yes.
Because the head of Morla looks exactly like the head of E.T., so I figured Germany needed something to kind of skyrocket themselves, and so they created their own E.T. with Morla.
Yeah, so Bastian screams for no reason when Morla shows up in the book, and the character, Morla and Atreyu, both hear the scream.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know if like the description in the written book was so horrifying that it moved Bastian to physically scream about it.
Well, I believe the story is getting ever more real for Bastian, so it isn't like an ordinary book anymore because he's getting so invested that it's actually he is Atreyu, or seeing things through the eyes of Atreyu.
Okay, so here's where the movie actually starts making its first points, I think. Its first sort of messages. So Morla is very much a nihilist. This turtle creature keeps saying things like, "Not that it matters, but," and then he'll answer a question, or "We don't even care whether or not we care." It's this sort of blasé attitude to everything, and Atreyu is painfully earnest, very desperate to save Fantasia from the encroaching nothing, and Morla is like, even death sounds good. That would be something. And so this movie, I feel like, is really sort of hammering home this sort of anti-nihilistic message for kids out there. And even if you don't know what nihilism is when you're a kid, as I certainly didn't at age 10 or whatever, there are these underlying feelings of like, oh, this is a bad outlook on life. You should not be like this. You should be like Atreyu. You should give a shit. You should care about what's going on.
Right.
And so Falkor ends up coming along, saving Atreyu from this wolf thing. What is this thing called?
Oh, okay. Let's talk about Gmork for a second.
Gmork, yes.
Gmork is half man, half wolf.
He's a half man? I did not get that at all.
I think he's a werewolf in the book.
Okay.
So he, I believe, is able to transcend between Fantasia and the real world, perhaps.
Wow.
Not really sure about that one.
I was actually expecting him to show up in the attic and scare Bastian in some way, but he did not do that. So continue.
But Gmork is just an agent of the nothing. Make lichens great again, I wrote down in my notes. Nice. But that's about it. That's all we really have. I guess they needed like a physical villain as opposed to just the clouds.
Right. And he's sort of the agent of the nothing who's been sent to stop Atreyu, who is like essentially the one, the preordained warrior, who the only hope of Fantasia, who's going to sort of do the Empress's bidding and help save them all.
And it's a pretty cool showdown towards the end when Atreyu ends up at that temple or wherever he is.
Yeah,
pretty cool showdown. We'll get to that.
We'll get there. Yeah. So Falkor shows up. So he's this weird luck dragon who I think let me read this real quick. I think the New York Times critic. Let me see. In the 1984
Everyone's a critic.
review from the New York Times, Vincent Canby panned the film as a graceless, humorless fantasy for children, and he said that the parts of the movie sounded like the pre-teenager's guide to existentialism. He criticized the tacky special effects, and I like this part. He said that the construction of the dragon looked like, quote, an impractical bath mat. So I do like that description of Falkor.
Yeah. I also have a description of Falkor.
Oh, go ahead, yeah.
I kind of like Bill Tull from Conan.
Yep.
When he's flying through the air for some reason, got a soaking wet hot dog, some cotton balls, boom, Falkor flying. It was just so, like, it wasn't smooth, it didn't have a pattern, it was just like flapping in the wind. Yeah,
it's very clearly limited by the technology of the day. And then even the facial movements and stuff, like the mouth does not move at all with what he's actually saying.
Probably because he's speaking German.
Maybe, very well could be, and I don't think any of that really matters to the heart of the story the effectiveness of the story. It's just sort of
a small
fun
child,
right? It's fun to sort of nitpick and look back on now.
Yeah.
But I don't think that would be something that people, that kids would realize or look at as a distracting factor in this movie.
All they see is a dog dragon thing that can fly.
Yeah, and they do this thing. Well, we'll get to that later on in the movie. But so Falkor, gotta say, weird as hell. He winks at Atreyu multiple times, and it's almost like there's this weird sort of sexual thrill that he gets out of being ridden.
Okay.
I'm just saying, there's like a weird vibe going on between the two.
I felt so bad that I felt like that when I was watching. I was like, oh man, come on.
I know, and it's certainly not anything that I picked up on when I was younger. But
no, of course not.
Watching it now, with years removed, and just being like, oh, this is like a little weird. It's not like overt, but there's some weirdness to it.
We have friends who have kids, and if a grown adult or an old man said something to that, said something nearby, I'd be like, let's get out of here.
Yeah, 100% yes. Just
a little unsettling.
So the Princess Bride reference I was bringing up earlier. So Falkor rescues Bastian. He takes him the full 10,000 miles to the what are they called?
Oracle, the Southern Oracle.
Southern Oracle, which
Reuse
is where
those assets.
Yeah, which is where he's supposed to find the answer of how to save Fantasia.
Yeah, who knows?
So he gets knocked out. Atreyu gets knocked out. Falkor saves him somehow, even though he's never met him and doesn't. I mean, Falkor knows all about Atreyu, but
maybe he remembers all of the matrices, or the Fantasias that have existed in the past. Maybe he's the architect.
That's a fascinating.
He's just waiting around every 6 millennia to go pick up a tray from the Swamps of Sadness.
That's interesting. Okay, cool. So I'll go along with that just because
sure, why not?
A fascinating read. So let's see. So Falkor takes Atreyu to this island.
Miracle Max.
Yeah, and Miracle Max from The Princess Bride shows up. He even calls his wife a wench and a witch and all this stuff. And the design, the makeup and prosthetics and stuff look very similar.
I'm not a witch. I'm your wife.
The Billy Crystal sort of vibe in Princess Bride. There's science stuff going on and little bubbling things. And it's very, the couple bicker back and forth a lot.
Humperdinck. Just pour lemon juice on my wounds.
So there's this Sphinx Gate, which is the first of 2 challenges that Atreyu has to go through.
Couldn't do the full 3, I guess.
There are massive breasts on these Sphinx that I noticed now, and I'm...
should have noticed at 10 years old.
Yes, exactly. Looking back on it, they were probably the first pair of exposed breasts that I had seen as a child. Because this movie is rated PG or something.
Sure.
And I saw this at a really, really young age, so I'm sure there was something. Many kids have probably had their sexual awakenings to these freaking Sphinx gate things.
It's probably why all those guys get laser blasted every time. They're just riding their horses past the gates. They're like, "Oh my god!" And then the Sphinxes are like, "Hey, dude, chill out! Quit staring at our bodies. We're celestial beings." And it's
yes, yep, totally.
And I'll respect the Sphinxes.
Totally agree with that. So he goes through, and it's this very Indiana Jones and the Last Crusade sort of moment of the penitent man will pass, and he does this sort of dive through and barely escapes the laser blasts. Gotta say, Atreyu, sort of a moron for having the scientific expert of how to get through these things, and having him right there and willing to give him the information, but just not being patient enough to ask him about the second gate and the second challenge and what he actually has to do. He's
just 2 seconds.
Yeah, nope, screw it. I'm just gonna go. Okay, yeah, sure.
And the advice would have been just stare and then walk through.
Right, yeah, because there was really nothing to that whole second gate. I don't know why.
Zero challenge.
Why there's a challenge to that at all. So yeah, the second gate out in the middle of the snow, he sees Bastian reflected in the attic reading the book about him.
Right.
So there's this, it's making the meta aspect of it, sort of kicking that up another notch.
As if you hadn't realized that these worlds were connected. This was the scene that hopefully got you on board with what was going on.
And then we go into what's the guy's name that played Putty in Seinfeld?
Warburton.
Yes, Patrick Warburton. He almost comes in to the movie because if you've ever been to Disney or Walt Disney World, Walt Disneyland, whatever, Disneyland, and you've ridden this ride called Soarin', he's the host of Soarin'. Yeah. So he shows up on the video monitors when you're standing there waiting in line, and he's like, "Welcome to Soarin', blah, 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 blah." So it's basically Soarin' over Fantasia is this whole sequence where Atreyu gets on the back of Falkor, and they're just cruising. They're going through, deserts. They're going through mountain ranges. They're going through
all that B-roll.
Every B-roll, every piece of stock footage that Wolfgang Peterson could get his hands on. And
bring me the whole reel.
Yeah, they're going crazy. So Atreyu finds this temple because he falls off of the back of Falkor.
There was a scene that was supposed to have cloud giants fighting, and they get in the mix. Falkor and Atreyu get in the mix of two cloud giants fighting, but the special effects weren't up to par, so they had to just create a storm.
That is interesting. Yeah, I didn't know that. So yeah, they roll into this storm. The nothing is, coming in hard and fast. Then Atreyu falls thousands of feet and just lands on this beach. He's totally fine.
He may have washed up to the beach.
Okay, yeah, true, yeah. That makes more sense.
I think his body, even though he is a fictional character, his body may have been crushed by the impact of thousands of feet plus sand.
I mean, it should have been crushed by the impact of just hitting the waves,
That's true, too.
But, who knows? Yeah. He survives because this is the kid's movie, and he tracks down this temple with markings of his journey, and then he meets, Gwork, Gamork, or whatever.
Gwonk
and
the
then,
wolf.
they have this sort of philosophical face-off. And you mentioned the scene earlier. Did you have anything that you wanted to mention about this?
Well, yes. I mean, as a kid, I don't think I ever picked up on why this place existed. But now I know that it's happened before. Atreyu doesn't realize that it's happened before. It's kind of like a rebirth cycle. I don't know what you would really call that. But then you start to realize that Bastion, there's like a new Bastion all the time that can recreate Fantasia, which is great if you're trying to reboot this thing. Because all you need is whatever 50-year-old kid from the original movie to show up and be like, I'm the old man now. And you could totally reboot Fantasia any way you want. But I thought it was really cool. I thought the ancient temple was like probably one of the best parts of this movie because it just oozes everything that this movie's about. Like, it's fantasy, it's like it was written in the 70s, but it feels like it's way older than that. It kind of just gives some mysticism to the whole thing, even though it's really very basic. I thought it was very Tolkienian in its delivery.
100%. I was just going to say that the even the Sphinxes almost have sort of a Tolkienian vibe to them, with like the two sort of opposing things with like the two giant statues sort of like at the end of the river.
Right.
The rings.
Oh, of course.
And then like the series of challenges. This movie to me is just like a almost like a blueprint, not a blueprint because a blueprint is used to build things off of, but it's almost like a Cliff's Notes or like a
template.
Sort of like a template, like a shortcut to the world of fantasy, to like fantasy tropes, like an introduction to that world. Like for kids, like. If you watch this and then read Tolkien, I feel like Tolkien will make some more, more sense to you than it would if you just went into it without having seen this movie.
Yeah, that's what I did, and I turned out fine.
And there are many other. It's not just Tolkien that this movie sort of riffs on, but it's old school. It's like Greek and Roman mythology level stories and about the challenges and the different levels of things and sort of the greater philosophical themes that are underlying this whole thing. So it's very much like like an introduction, an intro to fantasy 101 kind of thing. which I didn't really realize as a kid, but now looking back, it's like, oh, that's cool. This has all these elements from all these other different stories that are, more popular, and it combines them in this interesting way, which is like really what all storytelling is. It's people make a big deal these days about like how we're living in like a remix culture where the internet has blurred the lines between what is your own material versus what is like a mashup versus what is a remix of stuff, and really it's just like the technological equivalent of doing what this movie did with all of the different influences and stuff like that. This is what storytelling has been for generations.
Right.
So anyway,
pretty badass.
The wolf tells Atreyu that every piece of Fantasia is a part of the dreams and hopes of mankind, so therefore it's boundless. People have begun to lose their hopes and dreams. People with no hope are easy to control, and whoever has the control has the power. So it seems almost like there's a some sort of anti-capitalist message going through here, and this might be a little bit of sort of what the hippie angle you were talking about, where it sort of gets into this thing about like, you can sort of see how the control and the power aspect, you can see how Bastian's dad represents somebody who's lost hope, somebody who is easy to control and who has just sort of bought into the mentality of being manipulated by the circumstances that he's in. And then Atreyu...
Dabney Coleman.
Atreyu straight up just kills the wolf.
Yeah.
And then there's an abrupt cut to Falkor cruising around underwater, grabbing this... what is this thing called?
The Orin.
The Orin, the Ouroboros-looking thing that's like snakes eating itself. Yeah. And apparently Steven Spielberg owns the original prop, which I was like, oh, that seems like something Steven Spielberg would have.
He went to Wolfgang Petersen's house for like a dinner party and just stole that shit.
Yeah. Oh, that's
it's
awesome.
mine now.
So Fantasia is destroyed, which is sort of like a horrific thing when you're watching it, especially, trying to put myself in the mind of a kid watching this and being like, this is the world that we've just spent all this time in. The nothing is winning. It's tearing this stuff apart. You're basically just ending up in space, floating through with these just chunks of planet.
Right.
It's like this. It's very like comic book, almost comic booky.
It's a really cool scene, though.
Yeah, and
just imagine all those stars are suns in other Fantasia universes, galaxies.
This is nuts. So the Ivory Tower comes back. So Atreyu and Falkor finally get to the Ivory Tower.
Yeah, he finally wishes on the Orin, which he could have literally done at any time during the movie, and been like, hey, can I find what I need? Okay, there it is.
And the Empress sort of finally reveals to him the plot of the movie that they're in, because it's at this point that the movie starts getting meta as shit. They are... She talks about how he has to have done everything that he just did because it's what made Bastian come to them. If Atreyu had just wished upon the Orin or whatever, Bastian wouldn't have given a shit, and he probably would have stopped reading the book or something. Right. But Bastian had to experience the pain that Atreyu went through and the struggle to get to this point in the story, and then she basically calls it out and says that they're in a story and that Bastian doesn't know that he's in a movie. I forget what the line that she says, but there's something in there where she's like, he doesn't know that right now people are watching him.
Yeah. That was insane.
Yeah, which is just like, it sort of flew over my head as a kid, but it's a really cool concept. And I don't remember what it was when we've talked about the word meta and like the concept of being meta so many times, mostly in a joking manner over the course of this podcast. Yeah. And I don't remember what I said, but I think I remember saying at one point that whatever movie it was like introduced me to the concept of what that actually was. Yeah. And I think I must have seen this before I saw whatever that movie was. So longtime listeners who have, you know, an encyclopedic memory of NJNM facts can probably point that out to me. But
now, not a lot of people know this, Ben. At the moment this scene was filmed, the moment that the Emperor spoke that phrase, Dan Harmon was conceived, and so it's just the king of meta. Like his whole career is built on meta. All it comes back to this particular scene that was filmed for the Neverending Story in West Germany. I bet Dan if you go
in, only 31 years old, folks.
Yeah, is he really?
No,
was he born in West Germany?
I'm just saying because this movie came out in 1984. Dan Harmon is much older than that.
Oh, okay. Well, you know, no one's gonna look that up.
This movie, I think, is about the journey of storytelling. It's about this you know, it's not so much about the destination. It is a metaphor for storytelling itself and life being equated to storytelling and sort of
never-ending storytelling.
All these larger themes, and then this is where it's the movie starts to really hammer all that stuff home. There's this emotional connection that Bastian has with his mom, where the Empress almost becomes his mom, or it seems to be that way. Or
their brother and sister, maybe, of the same mom? That's how I took it.
I don't know, So Bastian has the power, as the reader of this book, to recreate Fantasia, and all he has to do is give the Empress a new name. I did not realize that when he actually does this, he screams Moonchild as the name that he's chosen, because when I was watching it I was thinking, oh, he's just going to say his mom's name. He's just going to give the Empress his mom's name. I don't know, maybe his mom was named Moonchild, but
it's another hippie reference. Like that might, like Sunflower would be a kid's name in the, or you've changed your name in the 60s, and then you know she gets a little wild, maybe at Woodstock. Well, maybe not at Woodstock. That would make Bastian way older. But anyway, you know, mid-70s, has this kid. And I'm like, oh, his name's Bastian now. I don't know what that means, but
and I can see maybe the idea of his mom being like a hippie sort of flower child, influencing his dad. Like as soon as the mom died, then the dad is like, maybe he used to be like that too. And then he's like, all right, now that she's gone, I've got to step my game up.
Or maybe that's why he fell in love with her, because he was so stiff when they met in college.
Yeah, opposites attract.
Yeah, and then he's a real cool father, or kind of a playful father, until she dies, and then he's like, face your problems like a man. I'm going to drink some eggs. Yep. I'm going to go file some paperwork, and I'm going to spank you later when you get home. So let's go to school.
Yep. So yeah, he screams Moonchild, which I couldn't actually. I only knew that because you texted me that as a joke afterwards.
Yeah.
But the movie is, the sound mix in that particular moment is so weird, because there's like thunder going, there's all sorts of crazy noises, and he just like screams out into the void.
Yeah. And a lot of subtitles just say indecipherable.
Oh, really?
I think so. And so a lot of people still argue that you're not actually supposed to hear what he says, but but it's in the book, so you can kind of figure it out.
Yeah, I did not watch this movie with subtitles on. I should have checked to see what the subtitles claim. But yeah, so I guess he gives the Empress her name, and she
basically gives him Fantasia.
Yeah, Fantasia is recreated, and then she gives him a list of, or I guess the ability to make as many wishes as he wants.
Right.
Which is, of course, every kid's dream.
Which comes into play in the sequel, Ben. Don't you might want to watch that sequel.
I'm interested now, sort of. Maybe I'll just read the Wikipedia entry on it or something instead of
I'd watch it.
So
it's like $5 at Walmart.
Okay, there aren't really any Walmarts out here in LA, but
it's a shame. They're making America great again.
God. So his first wish is to ride on Falcor's back.
Of course.
That's like the thing that every kid would want to do.
Falcor is ecstatic.
Oh yeah.
Oh, another kid in one day.
And then he takes Falcor into the real world to chase down the bullies that messed with him before.
Falcor seems right at home too. He's like, no problem. I've been to the real world before.
I am not fazed by any of these new inventions that I've never seen.
Yeah.
So yeah, he's just cruising, and it's sort of unclear whether or not other people can see, whether or not the adults in this universe can see Falkor. Do you think they can?
Oh, they are terrified in the streets. If you watch them, they are screaming and running.
Because it seemed like a couple adults in the background sort of moved out of the frame a little bit, but I couldn't quite like pinpoint any specific lines of dialogue or like track the eye lines of any adults looking up into the sky and being like, holy shit, there's a dragon flying down right now.
Right.
So yeah, it was unclear to me whether or not this was something that just kids could see, whether they possess the imaginative qualities to be able to imagine Falkor and see him that way, or if this is literally happening in this movie's version of the real world. Where there's just this horrifying dragon coming down and flying through alleys and forcing kids to jump into dumpsters. So the movie pretty much ends right there. You never see the dad again. You never see Bastian actually facing his problems head on, like the dad suggested.
Right.
There's a whole thing back and forth with the Empress right before this, where right before he gives her new name, she's like, do it, give me the new name, and he's like, I can't, I have to keep my feet on the ground. Like, he's processed his dad's advice to him, and then he rejects it. He refuses to listen to his dad's advice. He dives into his childlike whimsy, and then we never see the consequences of that. And I think that's a big part of what the original author, was his name Michael Ende, didn't like about the movie. So reading the last paragraph of the book's Wikipedia entry, it goes into this whole thing about how for every wish Bastian loses a memory of his life as a human, and then it really gets sort of dark at a certain point. He gets like warned about it, but he keeps creating, keeps wishing for creatures and like adventures and stuff for himself to go on. And each time it has this like negative impact on his psyche, on his life, on his existence, basically. He tracks down a sorceress at one point. There's this whole back and forth thing between like Atreyu and all these people. So Bastian is reduced to 2 memories at one point. It sounds sort of sad. He's like on the verge of losing his final memory. He can't find this fountain of water of life sort of thing that he's supposed to be tracking down. But Atreyu finds him and feels bad for him and sort of like helps him get back to the real world. So Bastian returns the book finally to Coriander, and Coriander says that he never owned the book. But he also says that he's been to Fantasia, which in the books is called Fantastica.
Right.
And then the book has gone on to the next person at this point. Right. So I think the idea of I can understand how a movie in 1984 aimed at kids would want to end on a happy note of, you get this magical device that grants you infinite wishes, and you get to get back at the bullies that treated you like crap earlier. But I think the author, Ende, was probably like, there's that, but then there's also this whole thing about consequences of what happens when you do that. And from the sound of it, what you're saying, that's sort of what they pick up in the second movie. Deals with that a little bit. So
it's a little weird, but it definitely addresses a lot of those issues.
Okay.
Especially the father-son relationship and the wishing too much and becoming too much a part of the fantasy world.
Okay.
Right? Where it actually becomes kind of a negative that you're too invested in a world you don't kind of sort of belong to.
Yeah, and that seems like the larger point of the book itself, and that point is nowhere to be found in the movie. So I can understand.
It's just badass that he got to ride Falkor at the end.
Yeah, pretty much.
And also the worst closing shot ever, where it was like just the top of the building, like not even a shot of the city, just kind of like a quarter up of what the
one block that they could film on.
And then like someone like passed out at the camera, and so it just kind of leaned up and just shot the blue sky.
Yeah, and then they're like, and that's a story for another time.
Yeah.
Just like blatantly leading into the sequel.
Yeah, a narrator from out of nowhere delivers the last line, and then the book closes, Ben, and you know what's right there on the cover?
The Quest.
The Quest.
Episode 100.
Yep, go back.
So,
great movie.
Tyler, I don't know if I mentioned enough the production design. I love that about this movie.
Oh yeah, fantastic.
All of the different environments of Fantasia just look great. There's like crystals shooting up out of the ground in different environments that Atreyu is sort of riding through. Oh, by the way, yeah, you see Artax has been resurrected when Fantasia is put back together. So yeah, anything, and like all of those side characters that were introduced in the very beginning of the movie, you get to see them as Bastion flies over them on Falcor's back, just sort of waving at them. So, hey, great, yeah, everything's all good now. Mm-hmm. So yeah, I mean, the production design of this movie is insane. Like every single, like the hieroglyphics on that temple and stuff, and the being right there next to the beach, and the visual effects are really cool. The way that they implemented all the different tricks of the trade, I thought was really impressive for the mid '80s, yeah, I think I like this movie. You know, it's not like it's not going to be a favorite of mine, and I think if I would have seen it multiple times as a kid, I would have been really in love with it, because it's really like a love letter to the idea of reading and you know, getting invested in stories, and that was something that probably would have resonated with me as a kid.
Fantastic film.
But yeah, you know, pretty good movie.
Yeah, I liked it. So, it's one of my favorites.
All right,
probably in my top 100 films of all time.
Do you have any other notes or anything? Any other last minute things before we jump on to next month's movie?
No, I think you closed it up pretty well, my friend.
Okay, so Tyler, we have the Not Just Pneumatic movie too.
Ah, yes.
Which is
my new favorite best friend.
Which is like one of those things that you experience at the bank drive-through, where you know, it's got that tube and you sort of send the check into the teller. Except I have one that happens to be hooked directly from my wall here in Second Floor Studios in LA to the county line of the city line of
Center Hollywood.
So yeah, I just push a button and they just send me a random movie, and that's perfect for what we do on this podcast, because we're always looking for random movies to review and talk about. So
great coincidence.
Let's go ahead and do that and find out what we're going to watch next month. All right, so Tyler, it looks like the movie that we're going to be watching next month is Vampire in Brooklyn.
Oh, Ben.
1995.
You're going to enjoy this outing.
This looks like Eddie Murphy plays a vampire in this.
If you enjoyed Eddie Murphy in any of his movies, you'll enjoy Vampire in Brooklyn.
Okay, so man, this one, I've never seen this. This is going to be interesting.
Pluto Nash, eat your heart out.
In the meantime, you can, like I said, email us notjustnewmovies@gmail.com. Call and leave a voicemail at 904-469-6566. So check that out, and then you can also find me on Twitter at twitter.com/Ben Pears. Music for this episode comes courtesy of the score from The Neverending Story, or maybe that crazy ass theme song. I'll probably try to use that one if I can. And then so next month, man, freaking Vampire in Brooklyn. Let us know what you think about it. Send us your reviews of The Neverending Story, of E.T., of the host, of everything we've talked about. Just, we want to hear from you. Let us know what you think, and then as Tyler said, make sure to send us your ideas for movies that you want us to cover in the future. And I think, Tyler, that's probably going to bring us to the end of this week's month's episode.
Oh yeah, Ben, by the way, before we leave, I do have an itch right behind my ear. Can you scratch that for me?
Yeah, man, Falcor, he loved that.
It feels so good.
So thanks for listening, everybody, and we'll see you guys next month.